by just sharing a little bit of the principles as background. Uh, we talk about this illusory, transitory quality that we experience in life, which is thought. And we take our thinking very, very seriously. When I started to actually see that my experience was coming through something that I can either give a lot of attention to or little attention to, but better than that, that I was making up, right? Now, thought comes and goes. We can't control the thoughts that come and go, but the ones that we hang on to, we give them a spin. And when I saw that that was the nature of my experience, that I didn't have to be afraid of my thinking, it became a completely life-changing scenario for me. Both Lee and I have been studying personal growth and self-development for years and years and years, and we've sort of run the gamut. We've done the Enneagram, NLP, Myers-Briggs, hypnosis, past life regressions, EFT, tapping. I mean, basically, you name it, we've done it. We've studied it, and we've studied with the best of the best. Lee used to work for Tony Robbins, Richard Bandler. We could go on and on. Really amazing people. And what they present has so much use. But we found the uncomplicated nature of where our experience was coming from. So rather than dealing with what's already been created, which is what all of those modalities do, they deal with what's already been created in your life. What this does, what this understanding brings forth, is what's actually doing the creating, which for me has brought so much clarity in my life. Now I'm going to give you a really silly, simple example of the power of this, okay? Just a day or two ago, and I didn't even tell Lee this. I love when I tell him when we're live, but just a couple of days ago, Lee had sent me a receipt for this course that we're taking, which was quite a lot of money. And he said, this is an expense, okay? Now he sent it to me, and I got my feathers all ruffled because I'm the one that decided that we should go on the course. Like, I'm the one that decided, yes, we're going to spend this money. We're going to do this course. So I thought he was saying to me, like, this is I was taking it as though he was saying, like, this is such a crazy expense, right? So I said to him, why did you send that to me? And he goes, oh, well, it's an expense for you to give to the accountant. Okay. So in my mind, I made up that email meant I made a mistake. Okay. It was totally made up. If I hadn't have clarified that with him, I would have been living with this guilt. I guess he doesn't really like the course. He always picks the courses that we do. I picked one. It wasn't the right one. I'm giving a silly example, but this goes on all of the time. All of the time, because we live in the feeling of our thinking. And at that moment, my thinking was very uncomfortable. Now, luckily, because I see this in my life, I know not to take my thinking, even if it's unpleasant, not so seriously, right? I know that whatever I'm experiencing and whatever I'm giving attention to is coming through me, through my filters. So what is so beautiful about this is that before in my life, when I would have thinking, I thought I had to do something about it. So maybe it would cause getting into an argument. Maybe it would cause making a problem where there wasn't a problem. But I thought that I had to do something about my thinking. So imagine how powerful this is in relationship. When you're in relationship with someone and you are feeling frustrated and you're taking something personally or whatever, but because you know that it's made of something that will look different in an hour or two when you've stepped away from it, you realize you don't have to do anything about it. You realize that you're just in a low mood and you're not super clear in the moment. So to me, that's a relationship saver, because I know that whatever's going on within me is what I've created through the energy, or what I made of my thinking, what I make of my thinking. But it's not true. So here's the ticker, is that our thinking looks so true. Okay, I'll give you another really quick example, and then I want to give you the stage. I was sitting with somebody today, and she's a personal trainer, and she said, you know, I'd really like to do more personal training, but I don't have a facility. And she said, and this has been for years, people want to train with me all the time, but I don't have a place to do it. And she was just kind of like, you know, oh, well. And I said to her, oh, well, I have a friend that owns a facility that lets people come in and train all the time because they just want traffic to come into their facility. Like, you don't even have to sign up with them or do anything. That's just kind of the way that they've set up their business. Now, the long story short is, in her mind, that looked like, you know, that was very structured and real, and there was no way for her to create this scenario. All she did was mention it to me, and, you know, easily created for her. But those are two very silly, light examples of how we take our thinking so seriously that we block ourselves, we limit ourselves. That's how we create these boundaries around ourselves, these structures that aren't real, that we've made up. That's my intro.
But it sounds so simple, doesn't it? It sounds so obvious, you know? It's like, well, of course, you know, if we don't take our thinking so seriously, things will work out. But what about when we're feeling all these feelings, and it feels so ridiculously real, and you know, Andy and I feel this too, you know? It's not like, you know, we're like all these emotions going on and we're like, it's just in our thinking, it's no big deal, holy smoke. No, it's crazy, because we're actually physically feeling this. But I had a client, we were talking the last couple of days actually, and a lot of our clients, they deal not only with ourselves, but they'll have like maybe a psychiatrist or psychologist. And this client had a psychiatrist, and he was speaking to her, and the psychiatrist said to him, well, you're not unhappy, you're not depressed, it just seems that your energy is a little bit low. So I'm going to prescribe you Prozac. That, to me, now here's the thing, hear me out here. I'm not saying that, you know, psychiatrists or psychologists are really bad people or anything. In fact, the opposite. I truly believe that their heart is in the right place. It's not about the money for the most part. I'm sure there are. So they really believe that they're doing the right thing. But if you are the only thing that you have is a hammer, you know, everything that you see is going to look like a nail. Like, if you're medically trained, or the way you're going to think about solving a problem is through medicine. When I was in the sort of physical therapy side, of course, what I would do is I would look for maybe an exercise that would improve something or something like that first before I even looked at any sort of medical idea. So that's what happens, is when we are so fixated on the way we've been trained to look at something, it's like we've got these blinders on that we don't see any other way. I did Facebook Live this morning, and I always told this story. I've told it many times. I'm sure you've heard it. And I heard it from a famous guy years ago called Zig Ziglar. And I used to love Zig Ziglar. And he had a great accent and everything. I can't do that bit. But what he used to say was that his wife was making a pot roast. And he's watching her and he's helping, doing the accessories and stuff like that, you know. And she cuts the ends of either side of the pot roast and throws them away. And he's like, what the heck? What are you doing that for? And she says, well, what do you mean? She says, that's how you make a pot roast. He said, well, I've never seen anybody do a pot roast like that. She said, that's how you make a pot roast. My mum's here. Ask my mum. My mum taught me, so you can ask her yourself. She was actually in the place. So they go and ask her mum. They say, well, why do you cut the ends off a pot roast? And she says, well, that's how you make a pot roast. She said, yeah, I've always done it that way. In fact, my mum taught me. And so obviously that's the way I do it. Right. This is it. So they get the gran at the top of the food chain on the phone and say, Gran, why do you cut the ends off the pot roast? And she says, oh, yeah. She says, I don't do that anymore. No, no, no. That was years ago because we lived in a small apartment with this little tiny cooker. And so the only way that we could put the pot roast in the oven was to cut the ends off. So it sounds so silly, doesn't it? Like, who the heck would believe that, right? You wouldn't go through generations believing that. And the reason I'm laughing is because I'm pretty sure that if you thought about it, you might have at one point, or may even now, still fall into that category, right? The same as I did. In fact, recently, I realized what was going on. I had a bit of a transition because I have been coaching now for, this is the 20th years. I started in 2000, so 2020 now, so it's coming up to my 20th year, you know. Now, I'm not saying I was good as a coach for 20 years. Like when I first started, you know, I had a script and I had this and I had that, but I was like, I had an insatiable thirst. I wanted to know every tool in the book, you know. I didn't just want a hammer, I wanted everything. I learned psychology and I learned the energy systems and I learned everything I could. And also I was learning about the body as well because I was training, personal training as well. And on top of that, and health coaching. So I wanted to learn everything. I had all these tools in the box. And then we came across, and I'd come across this earlier on in life, but I sort of put that to the side. Yeah, that's part of my toolbox, right? I don't need to focus on that. Finally, we come up with this understanding, the sort of principles underlying our human experience. And suddenly my toolbox seemed obsolete. And it was really difficult. And now it seems like the toolbox was my pot roast that I was knocking the ends off. But in actual fact, me chopping the ends off and being blinded was the fact that because I've learnt these underlying principles, that my toolbox is no longer, it's obsolete, it's no good. What I realized eventually is that the tools help me, help a person, including myself, but help me to direct someone toward the principle, toward their underlying understanding, underlying understanding of human behavior. So yes, I can still use my tools, but in the right direction. So I don't need to chop off the ends of my pot roast. Isn't it amazing how we just fall into this? And again, we know that you do not learn through words. You do not learn through, you sort of might link something to a story or a metaphor or something, but that's not how we learn. We learn through insight. And the insights come from, how can you relate that to your life? You know, how does that work for me?
No, it's so interesting. Most of you know we're involved in this course out in LA. It's a 7-month course, and it's a big commitment. It's a big time commitment, and it was a large financial commitment, and it's a commitment to our learning. So for us, it's our continuing education. It's like, you know, we're getting our doctorate in these principles and in what we teach. And I was listening to one of the webinars. And this woman was saying how when she first went to see a coach, a principle-based coach, that this coach, she wanted to talk about the details. She had a big project at work, something that looked like there was no, she just didn't even know how to tackle it, but it was really, really, really weighing on her. I mean, it was like a big thing, like either I do this or I need to get into a different kind of career. I don't know exactly what she was doing, but it was something that felt very daunting to her. And she was saying how this coach, this principle-based coach, would not discuss the details with her at all. just kept pointing her towards that her experience was coming through thought. And this woman was saying, I was getting so frustrated with my coach because I wanted my coach to tell me what to do. And she said, you know, the best thing was that my coach kept directing me towards where my experience was coming from. She said, because even though I wanted her to give me the answer, now that I see how my experience is created, now that I have a deeper understanding of these principles, she said, I so clearly saw how to create that project and how to do something that I would have never been able to figure out in my old state of mind. And I just said to Lee, that hit me so hard because it's so easy to fall into the trap of the details of our life. It's so easy to do that. And it's so easy to do that in coaching because, you know, we want to help people solve whatever they think is in their way. But the only thing that ever is in somebody's way is their experience of thought in the moment. That's the only thing that ever gets in our way. You know, we could never plan greater than God, the universe, whatever word you're comfortable with. Jack, you want to call the energy behind the system Jack, you could do that, you know. But we could never plan life better than this tremendous, loving, magnificent energy that creates this, that's behind this whole system, can plan for us. So we think we've got to do everything and we think we have to figure everything out. But I can assure you, the more that we step back and listen to our innate wisdom, the more we just enjoy life. I mean, it was really funny because I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday, and she probably thinks I'm a little woo-woo, which is okay. And we were talking about, she like really wanted to understand what I did, and you know, and meanwhile, she's heard me give talks before. like, you don't know this, but anyway, it just kind of made me laugh. So she really wanted to have a deeper understanding, and I just gave her an example of her own life. She and her husband have been looking for, they live in a condo and they've been looking for a house in this area for years. And since I've known her, they're always with a real estate agent, not always, but you know, they're looking, you know, it's sort of been this constant thing. And she said to me yesterday, she's like, Andrea, I have, you know, lived here for a couple of years. She said, I don't know what made me turn down this street. I've never turned down this street before, ever. But we turned down this particular street and we saw a house, and it was like the perfect house. She said, you know, my husband looked it up and it was like the right price. And we looked at all the pictures and it was like exactly our style and exactly what we wanted. And she's like, I can't even get over it. And they went to see the house last night. And I followed up with her this morning and she's like, oh yeah, we're putting a bid in. So I said to her, that is exactly what I'm talking about. That wisdom that comes from nowhere that tells you to turn down the street and you find in one day the house that you've been looking for 2 years, you know, asking real estate agent to find for you for 2 years. Mm-hmm. That's wisdom. That's the energy behind the system. That's something that knows exactly what we want and what would be exactly perfect for us. And it's got our back, for a better way to put it. Mm-hmm. So I just said to her, you know, that's what we do, is we show people that we always have access to that. And we can't possibly know through our little mini minds that only has the files that we've stored in it from our past. We can't know what's new and fresh and possible if we're trying to think our way out of it, because our brain, only has access to what we've already experienced. So it doesn't have access to new possibilities because it's not made that way. It's made like a computer and it stores files. But we're so stinking lucky that we all have access to the internet, that we all have access to this amazing energy that creates life that we can't explain, but it just sort of tells us to turn down a certain street, or to pick up the phone and make a certain phone call, or to reach out to somebody that really, really needed to be reached out to in the moment. That's what's on offer for us. And for me and for Lee, it's so very exciting because we spent years trying to demolish our beliefs and you know, go through, you know, our patterns and figure out what our patterns were. And when we saw that, you know, there's such a simpler way to experience freedom when we see that everything we experience is via thought. So if something happened in the past is haunting us, it's our ruminating over it that's causing us our distress and our struggle. It's not actually the situation, because if the situation is in the past, it's not happening now.
Yeah. But the habit is so strong that it doesn't feel that way. As I said at the start, it's like, it's so strong that there's no way that this is just thought, right? And no, there is no way that it is just thought. It's now thought combined with your habitual linking those feelings to that thought.
Yeah.
And you'll never catch the thought, because as I've said many times, if you heard me, is that thought is faster than the speed of light. So if it's faster than the speed of light, you ain't going to see it. You ain't going to catch each thought. You're just not going to do it. It's just too quick. It's too not too powerful, but just too fast and too furious. They estimate, whoever they are, I don't know how they counted it, but that we have like 60 to 70,000 thoughts in a day, right? Well, of those thoughts, 95 to 99% are the same thoughts that we had the previous day.
Yeah.
It's just a continuous, and that's why we talk about patterns.
Yeah.
Simply because we do, where our brain, so our personal mind, works on patterns. So if we're working just with the personal mind, the patterns are the most important thing. As a consequence, unfortunately, if those patterns aren't serving you, you got a problem, because you're going to run them over and over and over again.
Right. And that's why we get stuck, and that's why we get depressed or have anxiety.
Yeah.
And these kinds of things.
And unfortunately, what happens then is we try and work on the patterns. But there are so many of them, 60 to 70,000 thoughts, of which most of them have patterns linked to them. And if we think that those patterns have so much power, we're going to keep running them and then trying to prevent them. And as you know, if I say don't think of a blue elephant, you think of a blue elephant. So the more we try to change the patterns, in actual fact, it exacerbates it. It actually makes it more powerful.
Yeah.
They say about shame is when you link your identity to the behavior. So you feel shameful, you feel bad about who you are as a person because of the behavior. Whereas guilt is linked to you feel bad about that behavior. Well, that's what we do with patterns. We link those patterns to who we are. I'm a procrastinator. I'm a bad person. I'm a good person. I'm a this. I'm a that. Well, you're not your patterns. Your patterns are merely thoughts that you keep thinking. As soon as we realize that thoughts have no power by themselves, then eventually those feelings will dissipate. Not initially, just through that awareness. And this is the killer for all of us. Is we can think that, but the feelings don't go away.
No.
You know, if you've activated anxiety, that's going to run its course. So you can think all these thoughts, I could get my toolbox out, and it used to work, right? Now, here's the thing. Again, it's not to say the tools are not wrong, are wrong. They're not wrong. You just use them in the right context. So let's say your bandwidth is really small. And what I mean by that is you've got in your head, all sorts of patterns are running, you know, maybe you're in the midst of addiction or something like that, right? An addictive sort of running of these patterns. Now, a tool's not a bad idea to get you out of that. Maybe even in terms of medicine, you know, a small amount of medicine might just satiate you a little bit so you can come back to fresh thinking. But if we think, I need that tool in order to feel good, I need that tool in order to function normally, whether it be medical or whether it be a particular technique that you use. Now you've got a problem, because when your bandwidth comes out wider and you try and use that technique, it doesn't fit right. It's not the right tool that you need. So the more we can expand our bandwidth, how do we do that? It's very simple, really. Not very easy, but it's very simple. Well, I won't tell you techniques, but there is techniques, like, as you can see with my hands widening, you can expand your eyes, you know, your peripheral vision. A simple thing like that will actually quieten the mind. It won't quieten it to completion, but it will at least lower the amount of thinking. Just simple breathing helps. Simple tools like that are great. They're not the answer, remember. They're not the answer. It's just simple tools that you can do to maybe just get you into a more natural state.
Well, to allow something new and fresh to come in. I mean, I wouldn't be telling the truth if I didn't say I don't stop myself. Sometimes stop and go to my heart and breathe when I know that my thinking is going out of control. I absolutely do that. And the good news is I know that I can. I know that if I'm feeling distressed or if I'm feeling any sort of anxiety, that it's ruminating thinking, that it's not, and that's what this has done for me, is that it's shown me that even when I am feeling stressful thinking, that's all it is.
Yeah.
And there's a gift in that I don't have to do anything about it, that I'm not thinking clearly in the moment, so I don't have to react to it. When we don't know that, we think we have to react to it to get away from pain.
Right.
Yeah.
And even more so, we end up continuing that pattern. So if you're anxious about being anxious, now you've reiterated that anxiety. Now you're running the pattern of anxiety. You've got all these chemicals running through your system again. If you're feeling down about being down, you've got more and more chemicals bombarding you. So it's pushing you down, and then it feels so much more powerful than it initially needed to be. And at any point in time, and this is the beauty of having this understanding, at any point in time, no matter how huge it might seem at that moment, once you just click back and realize what's going on, you can eventually, and hear me out on that, eventually, it won't happen like that. I'm clicking my fingers in the fact that you come to your senses, basically, but you'll still have those chemicals going through your system. So eventually you'll just bring yourself out. You'll bring yourself out. You'll start to feel so much better. You ever had that time where you've said something and you've looked at, I mean, a perfect example, what you just said about the email. And
I didn't even tell you that. I was like,
you didn't? No.
I'm so offended. No, you didn't know.
But at the time, you were feeling a certain way.
Yeah.
And you had those chemicals in your system. I'm just saying chemicals because, you know, endorphins and
sure. You get all head up.
So you get these hormones in your system, right? Now, as soon as I said that, you didn't even tell me actually, but as soon as I said that, I'm pretty sure
I felt relieved.
New thinking came through, in which case new hormones and new chemicals were going through your system. Yeah. That quickly.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Like we have a friend that I talked to yesterday who lost her husband recently, and you know, she's got 2 kids, and it's not easy. Of course, it's not easy. And I just said to her, you know, is there ever a time when you feel okay? You know, when you forget, you know, when you're just in another space. She said, yeah. She said, you know, when I'm at work, I actually feel pretty good. And I said to her, just to point out that the situation is still there. You know, the situation didn't go away. And you were able to see something new and fresh and clear when your mind wasn't cluttered with the sadness, which is normal. I certainly would never take that away from her.
No.
But she had, like, she saw something in that moment. She was like, wow. She saw that our experience comes via thought. Her husband is not here. But when she wasn't thinking about that, when she was in a different headspace, she felt better. And she was like, oh my God, you're right. She said, the situation is the same. But for some reason, I'm feeling better. I'm allowing myself to feel good, you know? And we do that so often. It's like, you know, just look at your life. There's a situation that happens, you don't like it, you're focused on it, you feel crap. Somebody asks you to go out to lunch, you're having a great time at lunch, it's fabulous. You've completely forgotten about it, right? And then you go home and you remember it again. Well, that situation didn't go away. Your thinking changed, right? That's it. So for me, I know it sounds so silly and so simple, but this is so powerful to know that we don't have to be in pain to the extent that we may be used to being in pain. Because even when we are suffering at the mercy of our thinking, that's all it is. Doesn't take it away. But knowing that it will look different in time, and it will look different if I take my attention away from it. I mean, how many times have you tried to figure something out and finally said, you know what, like, I'm done, I give up, like, I'm not even going to think about this until tomorrow, I'm going to go watch a movie. And boom, you think about the answer, like the answer comes to you so clearly, you know? Now that we like see this so deeply, Lee and I know, don't try to figure anything out. Just listen to your GPS, listen to your wisdom, whatever you need. You'll know it. And, you know, Lee always says to me, go to your heart. Like, there's your answer. Go to your heart. There's your answer. So all the trying to figure out of how I'm going to do something, it's not up to me. It's not up to me. I get to leave it up to my wisdom, which is always here. And when my head is clouded, the worst thing for me to do is try to figure something out. When my head is clear, the best thing to do is to really listen to whatever I'm hearing.
Yeah, I just want to put a caveat on that, as I often do. And that is that it's not to say that you never feel pain or never do anything. You know, you just sit there and go, okay, wait for wisdom to tell me.
No.
It's just that you don't make decisions, and you don't try and act. You see, what we tend to do, again, we're the only species on the planet that when we're lost, we go faster, right? No animal goes faster when they're lost. They sort of slow down and think, where the heck am I, right? When we're lost, we move faster. When we're in a tiz, you know, we move faster. We think we have to do more. We have to keep moving. We have to keep doing stuff. But what we're saying is, it's actually better to just slow down at that point, not make any rash decisions or rash actions at that moment, to allow yourself to clear your mind a little bit. So just breathing into your heart or into your belly will actually just allow that momentary lapse to get clear thinking again. And it makes all the difference.
Because we have this innate reset button that we're all built with. It just comes with the system, and it's always here for us. So I certainly don't mean that you don't do anything. I mean, if I didn't do anything, you know, this wouldn't be happening right now, right? But it's the doing comes from a state of mind. The doing comes from a clear state of mind, as best you can. You know, there are times, of course, when you're not in a clear state of mind and you must make a decision. I know that. And I think what's been so beautiful, at least for me, and for you too, Lee, is to just sort of see these principles in action, to see that our thinking changes, to see that the answers are clear when we give them some space, to see that when we're in a lower state of mind, when our bandwidth is constricted, probably not the best time to do anything. And to also have that faith that it will look different in time. I'm going to out somebody. Actually, I won't say her name, but I have a friend. And we were on a phone call. This was a little while ago, and I'm just going to make a long story short and just give tiny little details. But we were on a phone call, and she was planning a big party, and there were lots of things going on, lots of moving parts. And one of them, she was not in agreement with the other people that were planning the party. And it was a big deal. It was definitely a big deal. And we talked about it, and she called me. I was either later that night or the next day. And she said to me, "You are not going to believe this." She said, "What I was worried about, the other party called me and said, I 100% agree with you. Let's do it this way." Now, making a long story short, but the point is that something's got our back. You know what I mean? It was like so beautiful. We were giggling about how beautiful it is that, you know, we worry, we put pressure on ourselves. And most of the time when we just let go of the reins and we see our experience through the eyes of love and see the other person's experience through the eyes of love and compassion, that energy, they feel that energy. They don't know what it is. They're not going to call you up and say, "I can tell you were seeing me through the eyes of love and compassion." But something clicks where they get an aha. And because we're seeing an experience through love rather than through trying to manipulate it, or, you know what I mean, or meet resistance with it, because we see things through love and compassion, things tend to work out. And the doing part isn't up to us. You know, she didn't do anything except see the situation with tons of compassion, and everything worked out. And you can look back in your life, I'm sure, and look at areas of your life where you just sort of surrendered to it, and you maybe had a deeper understanding that, you know, we're all doing the best we can based on the thinking that looks real to us in the moment. And that understanding gave you some peace, and through that peace the situation ended up sort of self-correcting. I know that's happened for us countless times, and that's been, like, for me, sort of the safety blanket in all of this, or the insurance policy in all this. Like, yeah, that's what I would say.
And again, I sound like I'm always putting a caveat, but it's not that you don't do anything. I just want to keep reiterating that. It's just that you don't do anything in a place of lack,
right? Because
you're more than likely going to do something that will reiterate that. I mean, we're taught this. Think about it. Pain. Why do we avoid anger or upset or whatever these natural emotions are? The reason being because we're fearing that this anger will continue. We're fearing that this upset will continue. I mean, I used to suffer and quote unquote suffer, right? I used to suffer from depression. Well, what is depression? I mean, this is my personal, interpretation of it, is that the sadness continues to the point of no return, where one feels out of control. Well, that's why there's a fear of the sadness, because we feel like it's going to continue and take us in a place that's not good. Same with anger. Now, as long as it's not directed at anybody, sometimes anger's a release. I mean, it's not a good idea to start shouting at people and stuff, right? But it's a natural feeling, right? But we suppress it. And the reason we suppress it was because we think we're going to be Mr. or Mrs. Angry, right? But if we just learn to accept our emotions for what they are in that moment, and what are they? They're merely a lesson or a message telling us what our thinking is doing, right? And so that's not like, oh my gosh, I got to change my thinking. Actually, it's just be okay with that feeling. Allow it to dissipate, because it will, just like anxiety, it will dissipate. Yeah. But the other thing is, we've been taught to swim upstream. So we've been taught we got to fight. We got to fight for our rights. He's a hard worker. She's a hard worker, right? Well, why is it such a merit? I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but think about it. Why is it such a merit that somebody's a really hard worker if they don't need to work hard?
And what we mean by that is the struggle in the mind. We don't
Yeah.
need that. We don't mean that, you know, you can just sort of float through life. But the hard work can be trying to figure everything out on your own
Yeah.
from a very stressed mind rather than a relaxed mind where things are easier.
Well, they've actually shown that
Yeah.
a lot of times in the workplace, that people who have been given a less time period for work were actually became more productive.
Yeah, that's been proven.
And so it, you know, what, I can't remember what the theory is, something that's whatever time frame we're given, I can't remember, something law or whatever time frame we're given, whatever we've got expands to that time frame. So if you've got to get something done overnight, you get it done overnight, right? But if you're given a month, guaranteed it will take you a month.
Yeah.
Because we expand to it. Now, the idea of swimming upstream, we are taught that things, if you hadn't worked for it, it's not worth having. If you don't, you know, push and slave and really go for it, it's not worth having. Well, unfortunately, that might be in some areas, but unfortunately, we put it to all areas. And as a consequence, we spend our entire life swimming upstream. When we learn where the river's going or the stream is going, and we learn how to go with it, life becomes so much easier, and we get so much more done in actual fact.
And what was coming up for me that you were talking about in the beginning was, you know, we'll live up to our diagnosis. And I remember I was diagnosed with ADD in my 20s, and you know,
you could add.
Yeah. And, you know, right then and there, I'm like, oh, well, that explains everything. And then suddenly I had a reason that I wasn't good at things. And you know, the doctor gave me a book on ADD. So I started reading all about it. And I'm like, oh, my God, this explains everything. This is me. So basically what happened was something that I wasn't aware of. I came into, you know, my realm of thinking. I believed it because it looked very real to me. And I thought, well, gosh, I need medicine to help me. Then I had a story in my mind that I couldn't do my job without this medicine. Like, oh, there's no way that I can be efficient at my job without this medicine. So I was taking this medicine thinking the only reason I'm able to do this job is because I have this medicine. And I wish I knew. I don't even know what hit me over the head, but it wasn't for long, because I didn't take it for very long, that I thought, you know what? I don't want to be stuck taking medicine for the rest of my life. Like, I don't want to have that experience for the rest of my life. Maybe I can do this job without the medicine. And I mean, I literally said to myself, you know what? What if this is in my thinking? This was before I knew the principles. But I realized that a lot, and Lee and I have talked about this, and he's helped me so much with this, because a lot of the things that I think I'm not good at, I've made up. But the long story short, I'm sure you can see how if somebody tells you you have a deficiency, you believe you have a deficiency. And I remember like being terrified to take myself off this medicine, thinking I won't be able to do my job. But I took myself off the medicine and I did my job. I was one of the best people there. Always. It was amazing. It was like I had it in my head that I had a deficiency because somebody told me I had a deficiency. And then I lived up to my diagnosis. I can't do that because I have ADD. I have a hard time concentrating because I have ADD. You know, it was like this crazy cycle that looked very real to me. So, you know, I'm very adamant about, if we don't have to give something, sometimes we have to give something a diagnosis because sometimes we need medicine for it. That's just part of life, and thank God it's there. But if we don't have to pinpoint ourselves into a corner, we've got so much more freedom to be at the healthiest version of ourselves when we don't have to live up, because that's what we'll do. We will live up to that diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, it's so funny because it's not that funny, I guess. You couldn't go on the road with it.
Might not be that funny.
No, but it is so funny that we find it very hard to pick topics for our talks now. It's like our webinars and so on. Whereas before, when I was in the NLP world, my toolbox and all the different psychological things that I used to talk about, oh my gosh, we could do like 3 years worth of different topics, right? But the reason it's become so difficult is because it's sort of like everything at the bottom. If you imagine all these different topics and different situations and circumstances and problems and challenges that people have, and it just goes up. And as we go up to here, to a higher state of consciousness, this higher state actually covers all of those topics. So it's somewhat one size fits all, but it's one size that adapts to all as opposed to fits all, you know?
Right, because
it's not like this big giant thing.
It just is.
Yeah.
It just is. It's how the system works. It's us without the paper bag over our head. That's really what it is. Yeah. So yeah, it's funny because I mean we do it ourselves, you know, we talk about the little things, the little problems that are going on and these little things that we have to deal with, and then, you know, we reset, you know, we let our cork float back on top of the water after we're done pushing it down for hours and hours and hours. We let it float back on top of the water, and we can very clearly see the nature of our experience is coming through thought, and that thought looks different based on our level of consciousness. And there's an infinite well of possibilities thanks to universal mind. And we just sort of get like a reset of that. And when we get that reset, when we go above the maze, I liken it to being in the maze when we're trying to deal with all of our problems. When we go above the maze, we have such clarity as to how to get out of that maze, right, to make a right or make a left or go straight. But we can't see it when we're in the maze. And that's the beauty of seeing where our experience comes from, because right, we're not fooled by it anymore.
And then you start to swim downstream.
Yeah.
Then life becomes so much easier. Not easy, still have situations, still have things to deal with, but we're dealing with them as we're going with the stream, as opposed to fighting and resisting and in this constant battle of life.
Yeah, I would say they're not so scary.
Not so scary, yeah, absolutely. So scary. Because we feel like we can, quote unquote, cope with them.
Yeah, well, I'm going to take the word cope away from you. Is that okay? Does anybody have any questions, by the way? We should look. I'm just going to check. But the reason
there's no questions on there. But
okay. The reason I'm going to...
If anybody would like to, if there's anything that comes up for you, like, what about this? We're more than happy to talk about that.
If there's something you'd like us to speak to, if something's coming up that you're curious about. What I was going to say, the reason that I'm going to take away the word
that's
cope.
why I put it in quotes.
Okay. Oh, you did air quotes?
Yeah.
I didn't see
Not
that.
air quotes, but I said quote unquote.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I don't do air quotes.
No, you don't. That's not, would be very British of you.
Not really.
So, but the reason that I don't like the word cope is because, you know, when we cope with something, I feel like we're fighting to, you know, we're handling it rather than seeing it for what it is, rather than seeing what it's made of. We don't have to cope with something that we're making up. You know, if there's something to do, we will be involved in the doing of it. But it won't come from a stressful place of coping and trying to cover up something that we've made up anyway, in a sense.
Yeah. So, any questions? We've got a lot of... Oh, is that
Deb?
Deborah?
I think Deb may have a question.
Yeah.
Oh, she has her doggy.
Oh, you have a doggy.
She has doggy, yeah. Hi, Deb. Oh my God, that face! I can't. What's the face?
So when you were talking about the expense and the email,
yeah,
that you initially, like I would the same, get very, oh my goodness, or you know, feel defensive and feel you know, I screwed up.
Yeah.
So in that moment, there's nothing to really get rid of that feeling in that moment.
No.
So. What do you do? What do you physically do to, you know, even it out?
Yeah.
So you're talking about before she talked to you and said, you know, about it.
Right.
Gotcha.
And I realized I
instead
made
of
it up.
talking to you,
He wa-
Lee,
He
is
wasn't
there
saying
something
it
she
at all.
could have done is there something she could have done to, neutralize that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a question I want to ask you. Is that a marijuana plant in the background there? So
No, but
it's
I
a
welcome
new
them.
business you've got going there, is it?
Please.
Marijuana, no, we have marijuana, but not in a plant.
Oh, right. Excellent. Right. Yeah. So,
Not yet. One day, hopefully.
but that's really an example of what you can do. And it's very simple. And that is simply change.
Smoke a joint.
And smoke a joint. Yeah, exactly.
You
Yeah.
could do that.
Perfect. But you can simply take your direction in a, your focus in a different direction.
Yeah.
And that by itself will automatically, I mean, again, I've used a perfect example many times, and that is I was driving on A1A, and because 95 was like crazy at that point, and I was late for this appointment, and I'm getting all agitated, and then I got behind this little old lady that had her arms up like that, and she was doing the weird, driving the car like this at -2 miles per hour. I'm pretty sure we went backwards. We didn't even and I'm just getting in a right state. The worst of it is I was going to a group to teach what we're talking about now, right? And there I am in a total state. Oh my gosh, I'm going to is this lady ever going to move, for crying out loud? And like, I'm English, so I never beep the horn. I just don't.
No, he just complains about it.
I just complain in the car,
I'm from Philly, I beep the horn.
But I'm driving along, and I finally realize, again, like I said before about coming to your senses, what am I doing? I'm stressing for absolutely no reason. Now, yes, I'm late. Yes, that position, that's the situation, right? Yes, there's a person in front of me going slow, but there's absolutely nothing I could do at that point.
Right.
And I suddenly realized, wait a minute, I'm on A1A, and this was like in summertime. It was a little bit late. So the sun was just slowly coming down, and it was absolutely beautiful. And I suddenly noticed something that was there all the time, but I didn't notice it because I was so caught up in the fact that I was going to be late, and this person had it in for me. She was obviously called by somebody to purposely drive in front of me and keep me in that position. And that's the craziness of our thinking. Yeah. But as soon as we just realize, wait a minute, okay, let's say for argument's sake, I did mean that, with the email or something. Well, by her ruminating over it, it would just merely get more and more, she would get more and more frustrated, more and more hurt, or anything like that. But by simply just taking her mind away from that part of it and just noticing the big picture, she would have possibly even realized that isn't what I meant at all. Might have. And even if she didn't, she would have felt a heck of a lot better.
Yeah, and what I wanted to say was, I got curious. I just simply asked him. I mean, that was kind of the simple answer, was just for me to ask him and get clarity. And if he would have,
assumptions.
Yeah. And if he would have said, yeah, I really thought this was expensive and I didn't think it was worth it. Well, okay, that's his thinking. It's not my fault. I can't take responsibility for that. We made a decision together, and whether he likes it or not is on him. So no matter what, I would have gotten relief by getting curious. But you see, so many times in life, we don't get curious. We don't ask questions. We just make assumptions, and then we live with that discomfort. And that's where we make a mistake. I can't tell you how many times I've thought one thing, he's thought another, and then it's come up later. I mean, I could really tell you a funny story, but it's come up later that we both had very different thinking about the same situation. Mm-hmm. It's like actually laughable. But what I've found is that, first of all, get curious, ask questions. Second of all, even if he was upset, that belongs to him. that has nothing to do with me. If he wants to blame me, that's on him. Because
Well, again, you're going into the description,
that's true.
and that would come as a consequence of raising your consciousness, as opposed to getting into the, because
exactly,
that might be the example as a consequence. But when you raise your level of consciousness, that starts to come into
right, because even if it did bother me, that bother is made of thought.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, even if that upset me, that he was, let's just say he wasn't happy about the course, even if that upset me, even that upset, I make meaning of it. That's the whole thing. Like, that's the crispy stuff. I make meaning of it.
Yeah.
Deb has a raised hand.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
So does that answer your question?
Yes. Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, I think, well, obviously you've ascended to a level where you get it faster than I'm going to. But yeah.
Not necessarily. I mean, it's the beauty of this is it's completely, what do they call it? Equal opportunity. Oh, we've lost Debbie. I did know your hand was up, Debbie, but we're just going to finish off.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. Go ahead, Deb.
I just want you to know that this is a level playing ground. As soon as you have this understanding yourself,
right.
You will find that you'll do exactly the same as we do in that sense. We're no better than you in that sense.
Right. Right.
No, I'm not saying. I'm just saying you've practiced it more, and I get that. I'm a newbie.
Yes. Yeah. Debbie.
Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you so much, Deborah. I know, Deb, you had your hand up.
Hi, loves. Thank you.
Hi,
beautiful.
So good. Something just sparked in me when you were saying about asking questions. And what's so beautiful is we don't have to just ask questions of the other person. We can ask questions to ourselves, to our wisdom, to God. Show me what my next right step is. Show me what the truth is in this. Show me how to see something new in this. And positioning ourselves towards the solution rather than the problem,
right?
All of a sudden new insight starts flooding in, and you see something that you didn't see. So for me, I'd say 90% of my questions are not for other people, but to myself, to God, to the wisdom inside of me, to the energy behind life. That's like an air traffic controller who sees the bigger picture, who sees where there's turbulence, who knows how to get me to navigate in the right direction, to course correct.
Yeah.
Right, absolutely, because you're seeing at a higher level.
Absolutely. And it's, I think it's the openness and the willingness to see something different.
Yeah.
To get out of our own habitual thought patterns of this is the way it is, this is fact, when it's like, wait a second, maybe not.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I love the words that you just used, Deb, openness and willingness. And when I was working in treatment, I would always say to the people I was working with was, you just have to be willing. That's it. That's it. Just be willing.
Even in the willingness, we can pray for willingness. We can ask for willingness, because it's always available.
Yeah.
Peace is always available. Wisdom is always available, because that's the nature of who we are. But it gets covered up by our thinking and feeling. But underneath the thinking, underneath the feeling, there's wholeness, there's resiliency, there's joy. Even when there's other feelings on top of it, that never changes.
Right.
And that's what's so beautiful, that we have this well of wisdom, this well of insight, and it's an endless well. It doesn't ever run out.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. It's
love that.
So
Thank
beautiful.
you, Debbie.
Thank you so much, Deb. I love you. Mwah.
Love you guys.
Beautiful. Thank you.
So thank you. I just want a final question, Deborah. What's your doggy called?
It's Blondie.
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 Oh, I love that.
So cute.
Hey,
that
Blondie.
face?
Oh, look at that face. Isn't that
Oh
great?
my God, that's like not even fair.
Beautiful.
That's like not even fair.
All right, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you
for
so
joining
much,
us.
everyone, for joining us. We wish you tons of love, tons of blessings, and we will see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Night, night.
Good night, everyone. Good night.